This is Proxy Countdown. Welcome to the big show for the week of September 9, 2024, alongside my tag team partner, Matt Muscardi. I'm Damian Rollis. On today's countdown, Ankara Holdings finally gets its man at Norfolk Southern. The Southwest Airlines board is now up for grabs. Darren Woods is now Exxon's chief threatening officer. The only shareholder who agrees with Logitech founder Daniel Boré is Logitech founder Daniel Boré. And on the big vote, we draft a whole new board for Darden restaurants. Let's get to our top stories. On our trade wire, the board of directors of Norfolk Southern terminated CEO Alan Shaw in connection with an ongoing investigation that determined that Shaw violated company policies by engaging in a consensual relationship with the company's chief legal officer, Nabanita Nag. This is their language, by the way. It said in their filing that they terminated Alan Shaw. That's what it said.
It's very aggressive.
Didn't terminate his contract, didn't terminate his position, just terminated Alan Shaw. And you know they are pissed, because he was terminated for cause, which means no severance, and he can kiss his outstanding equity awards bye-bye. The company,
At what point does Ankara take a victory lap here?
They deserve one. The company also announced that Mark George, the current CFO, will be the new CEO and will join the board. I didn't see the interim title anywhere, so this sounds serious for now, I guess. And Jason Zampi becomes the acting CFO, and of course, Chief Legal Officer Nabanita Nag is fired. So, yeah, as you said, Matt, a victory for Ankara Holdings.
And maybe a slap in the face of Jeff Sonnenfeld a little bit?
Jeffrey Sonnenfeld touted two big CEOs this year in lengthy reports. The first one was Dave Calhoun at Boeing, who is gone, and the second one was Alan Shaw at Norfolk Southern, who has just been fired for violating company policy.
I would say if Jeffrey Sonnenfeld writes something about you and you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, just watch your back.
Expedia Group Vice Chair Peter Kern stepped down, and in a director mic drop moment, quote, the board eliminated the seat previously held by Mr. Kern. You know you're good when they just take your chair away. Bentley Systems added CEO Nicholas Cummins to the board. My dream of keeping CEOs off all American boards continues to die slowly. Workday has appointed Rhonda Morris as a Class 2 director to join the board in early 2025. Since the board is classified, she won't stand for her first election until roughly June of 2026. In the meantime, she will get $750,000 in equity, 1/4 of which will vest even before shareholders have a chance to give their opinion on her. She'll be there for about a year and a half before they have a chance to vote on her. Why? Why are directors allowed to serve before their first meeting vote? I don't understand this.
So we covered this in another Proxy Countdown. A year and a half, the average tenure of a director is 7 years. That means she will serve 21% of her term if she is the average director before she even gets voted on.
And she will, 1/4 of her equity, her sign-on equity will vest already before they vote on her.
I mean, it's already kind of comical that they're announcing she's going to join the board in early 2025. I mean, we're already 3 months before she even joins. They're announcing she's going to join. And then she doesn't officially get a vote for another year and a half after that. She's going to effectively be there almost 2 years before anyone even notices. Two
companies are joining the modern world and have appointed their third female director. That's Mary Puma at Entegris and Lisa Campbell at Dynatrace. Entegris and Lisa Campbell at Dynatrace. Lisa Campbell has also been appointed to the cybersecurity committee of the board, despite her long career as a marketing executive. That one puzzled me.
Maybe she markets cybersecurity.
And finally, here is the entire filing from Sempra. Quote, on September 5th, 2024, Bethany J. Meyer resigned as a director of Sempra effective the same day, end quote. Yep, that's all you need to know, shareholders. By the way, according to our data, she's the highest performing director on that board with a 665 average overall, and has only served since 2019, and yet Sempra is not telling us anything about why she's stepping down. Highest performing director at Sempra. Okay, that's it for the Trade Wire. Moving over to our proxy cage matches, we have a few things to talk about this week. First of all, a big story out of Southwest Airlines. After activist investor pressure from Elliott Investment Management, which has been going on for well over a month, Southwest Airlines agrees to a big board overhaul. So, Southwest Airlines executive chair and former CEO Gary Kelly has given up and will step down from his role at the company's 2025 annual meeting. Meanwhile, 6 other directors have resigned and will leave the board in November. That's David Beegler, J. Veronica Biggins, Roy Blunt, William Cunningham, Thomas Gilligan, and Jill Saltow. So 4 new directors will be appointed at that time. So what does this mean overall? It means that the board is losing 62% of total influence according to our data. That includes 21% influence from former CEO and chair Gary Kelly. The board's also losing 4 directors who are about 80 years old and 3 directors who have been on the board since before the first Obama administration. So that's what's going on over there at Southwest.
It's hard to say that Gary Kelly is giving up and stepping down. He's been there for 20 years.
He didn't. I don't think he wanted to leave.
At some point, although what this does do is it ruins our case study of Southwest, because we did a whole case study about Bill Cunningham and Gary Kelly and how Southwest basically has been making bad decisions forever. So I'm a little angry at Elliott for ruining our case study.
Yeah, they just listened to us. Activist investor Cevian ups its stake in Swiss insurance company Baloise to 9.4%. As a result, Baloise chair Thomas Van Planta said the company is considering changes in its board of directors, of course. Quote, "We want to strengthen the insurance expertise on the board," end quote. What an incredible concept for an insurance company. But he's not wrong, Matt. According to our data, nearly 2/3 of the board's influence is represented by the following skill sets: economics and accounting, building and construction, and mathematics.
That doesn't sound too bad. It does strike me, though. Why is it that board strengthening only happens when that doesn't this suggest that boards are generally weak and are waiting for an activist to step in to strengthen? I mean,
absolutely.
It doesn't make any sense.
News Corp investor Starboard Value said it plans to challenge the company's dual-class share structure that gives control to Rupert Murdoch and did transfer it to 4 of his adult children. The problem is that James, Elizabeth, Prudence, and Lachlan, Rupert's kids, Lachlan is the chair of News Corp as well as the CEO of Fox. They may not actually agree on how to run the family business, creating uncertainty that represents a risk to shareholders, according to Starboard Value. The dual-class voting shares allow the family to control News Corp with a relatively small economic stake, which I think is only about 14% of actual share ownership. The quote from Starboard Value is worth repeating here. "While we can understand how some could see a benefit to a visionary founder retaining outsized control for a limited duration of time, that potential understanding vanishes as super voting power and the associated protections transition to others. The 4 Murdoch siblings with voting rights within the trust are reported to have widely differing worldviews, which collectively could be paralyzing to the strategic direction of the company. More importantly, we are not sure why their perspective should carry greater weight than the views of other shareholders." I mean, you could fill in a lot of other media and tech companies into the Starboard Value's thought process here.
You not only could you, but
you should.
Keith Rupert Murdoch is trying right now in Nevada to give full control to Lachlan by the trust that owns the super voting shares. He's trying to create super voting shares of the trust that he gives to Lachlan. So he's literally going to have dual class on top of a dual class structure in order to maintain that vision to answer that question. But it notwithstanding the fact that there are other shareholders who own more of the company.
Yeah. Well, 86% they own 86% of the company, not the voting rights.
The Murdochs only own 40% of the voting rights, so it's possible to outvote them.
And lastly, Exxon CEO Darren Woods is back at it. He is now openly threatening activist shareholders thinking to follow this in Arjuna Capital, who filed a climate-related resolution at the company's annual meeting this year. Exxon sued those investors, and Woods is now pre-scolding his shareholders. Quote, "We hope we don't have to use that action in the future. But if we find people continue to abuse the process, we're going to hold them to the rules." So he's threatening his shareholders once again.
Arjuna followed the rules. They followed the rules. That was the rules.
Darren Woods is mad at something else and suing his shareholders to prove it an example. Okay, let's move over to our vote results table. There are not a ton of elections going on right now, but there's a few notable stories this week. First of all, the winner of the week is AST Space Mobile Director Christopher Sambar, who is beloved by 99.96% of shareholders. That's an incredible vote tally.
That's a lot of love.
At Nathan's Famous, yes, the hot dog company, 30% of shareholders were against directors Howard Lorber and AF Petrocelli. Howard Lorber has been executive chair since 2007 with a higher total compensation even than the CEO, Eric Gadoff. He's been a director since 1987 and is the company's largest shareholder with 24% of the voting power. So really what this means is that essentially half of all shareholders not named Howard Lorber want him gone. So there you go. Also, AF Petrocelli is 80 and has served on the board since Bill Clinton's first administration. So,
that's not that long.
Nathan's Famous shareholders getting a little uncomfortable there. At Gryphon Digital Mining, Jessica Billingsley received nearly 1 million more votes against her reelection. It's a total of 52% against her reelection, but was nonetheless elected as a Class 3 director to the board for a 3-year term because of the company's plurality voting standard, which means effectively that in an uncontested election, directors need only one single vote to be reelected. Yes, this is still a voting standard at many U.S. companies.
I'd love to be in a place where the director didn't get that one vote.
One vote. And finally, at Logitech, Daniel Borrell, one of the 3 people who founded Logitech in 1981 and who still owns a 1.2% stake, kind of like Howard Schultz, he failed in his attempt to oust chairperson Wendy Becker. So he really wanted Wendy Becker gone, but 86% of shareholders voted for the reelection of Becker as the company's chair. The weird part of the story is that Daniel Borrell, he wanted board member Guy Gecht to replace her, but Guy Gecht said even before the meeting that he would not accept the position of chairperson if he was elected. So this is just a crazy story. I mean, the founder is anointing someone who doesn't even want to take over the role of chair. It's just a mess over there at Logitech.
Did Guy Gecht get enough votes to get reelected?
Well, so there were 2 separate votes. First, there was just a normal board vote where, yes, Guy Gecht was reelected and so was Wendy Becker. But there was also this sub kind of special shareholder vote. This is a European company. They have slightly different voting votes. There was a separate shareholder vote which asked shareholders if Wendy Becker should be reelected as chair or should it be Guy Gecht. And in that vote, Wendy Becker beat Guy Gecht 86 to 14%. So again, Guy Gecht wouldn't have even accepted that vote. So you think the founder could have asked him if he was willing to take over the role first.
I think they should have done like a thumb war for the chair role.
That's all I have. Moving on to the big vote for the week of September 9th. 2024 is Darden Restaurants, which holds its annual meeting next week on Wednesday. Before I hand it over to you, my very quick observations are, first of all, over 40% of this stock is held by institutional shareholders, including Capital, which owns 22%. It's a considerable amount. Overall, this is another very average company hitting 508 overall. We've seen a lot of average companies on the big vote like this. Looking at the director's skill sets, only 10% of influence is actually represented by food production, which may or may not be concerning for a massive restaurant brand. And finally, the only other observation I wanted to point out before I hand it off to you, Matt, is here's my big concern with Darden restaurants. You've covered a lot recently some of the anti-DEO flip-flopping board directors who have basically stabbed most of America in the back by getting rid of their DEI policies. One of those companies was Tractor Supply, right? Tractor Supply.
Mm-hmm.
The CEO of Darden Restaurants, Ricardo Cardenas, and the chair, Cynthia Jameson, have both at one point served on the boards of Tractor Supply companies. I'm a little bit worried that Darden Restaurants, which is big in the Midwest, might be another target for a anti-DEI flip-flop.
There is some definite DEI cowardice on this board. But honestly, so all right, here's how I approach Darden.
Let's do it.
Starting from the market. First of all, I didn't know the company that owned Olive Garden had a $19 billion market cap. I mean, it seems like a fairly big company for what I associate with effectively strip mall restaurants, right?
Like steak,
Olive Garden,
fake Italian food,
Ruth's Chris.
Texas Longhorn, I believe.
Longhorn, Capitol Grill. It's a dividend payer. 61% of analysts say it's a strong buy or a buy. So
because of the dividend.
The market likes it. Yeah,
okay.
I think in part because of the dividend. But if we're honest, the business model here is it's a carb and beef delivery system. That's all it really does. It serves you steak and pasta.
Very Midwest.
It's 93% vertically owned. The only things that are most of the franchised restaurants are the Ruth Chris restaurants, which they purchased last year. Olive Garden makes up 44% of the restaurants, and Longhorn is 27%. Those are the big two. The others make up the rest. The markups are by far the highest at Olive Garden, and when you think about it, it's really just pasta and cheese
and bread,
and breadsticks, right?
Yep.
Like these are cheap things, but the other restaurants offer more alcohol. They offer a lot of beef, more expensive. Expenses are 50-50 food and labor. So if I'm cutting this down, right, the risk is basically food safety and labor issues. Those are the risks. So if you're looking at the board, the things you want to be thinking about is the board managing those risks, right? There's 191,000 team members, with 94% of them are hourly, and it's an 80% turnover rate annually.
That figure shows in the CEO pay ratio where Cardenas is making 527 times more than the median worker who's only making about $23,000.
And they disclose that as one of the best hourly wages because they say the average hourly wage with tips is $23 an hour and one of the lowest turnover rates in the industry.
Oh, despite what turnover rate did you just give?
80% turnover is one of the lowest.
Yeah.
That's what they disclose, right? But it's clearly that people are not making enough. They started a program called Darden Dimes in the 90s where they take 10 cents out of an hourly worker's paycheck, they put it in a fund, and then they use that fund to pay other hourly workers who are in financial distress. That fund still exists today. Yeah. The CEO made $12 million last year, and they paid out of this fund $1.7 million to people in financial distress. It just makes me wonder, right, if you took the equivalent of 10 cents out of the CEO's pay, whether or not you could cover the whole fund.
Yeah.
But when I look at the board, if we know that the risks here are labor and food safety, right? You'd expect on the board to see people, as you mentioned, food production backgrounds, maybe some labor backgrounds, HR, maybe something like that.
Yeah, except you don't, to be fair to Darden restaurants, you don't see really labor backgrounds, HR backgrounds in any of these type of companies. You might see more food production, but you really don't see a lot of HR and
The
labor.
first thing that struck me about this board, well, the first thing that struck me is why don't they have their favorite menu item listed like Starbucks does?
Absolutely.
I was actually upset by that.
That's a great idea, yeah.
I wanted to know which one gets like the ravioli carbonara or whatever.
Or just like 7 raw steaks.
But when I looked at the board members, what struck me is actually everyone, and I do mean basically everyone, all but one director, I think, has had experience with bankruptcy or being bankrupt adjacent.
Yeah.
As in their company is failing and they had to sell the company, or the company like was in bankruptcy and they were running it out of bankruptcy, or it went bankrupt under their watch.
Now, yeah, you mentioned this to me earlier in the week, and my first observation was maybe this is a good thing, because when I think of giant restaurant chains in the United States, they are prone to frequent bankruptcy. So maybe it's a good thing. Maybe they're trying to prevent the bankruptcy. I don't know.
Well, that
or
was
maybe
like
it's inevitable. Maybe it's their
my
destiny,
big question,
right?
Like it might be their, and if it's their destiny, that's not great for shareholders.
No, because
But
what I'm thinking too is that they all pick from the same gene pool of similar type industries, right? They find their directors from the same networks of people, and those people just happen to come from bankruptcy kind of companies, right?
But here was the problem. That would be true if they were picking from the gene pool of other restaurants, right? Or hospitality or something restaurant adjacent. But what they are, and I mean this in the most literal sense I can, is strip mall board directors.
Okay.
The
But
directors
there are a lot of bankruptcies
include
in strip malls.
the ex-CEO of Mensa, who is the ex-CEO of Long John Silver's when it declared bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
The chair, Jameson, she calls herself a turnaround CFO. She's
Yeah.
currently on the board of Big Lots and has been since 2015. They just declared bankruptcy. She's also on the board, or was on the board, of Office Depot, which has been trying to stop existing for the last 10 years. Like
Yeah.
it's been
I didn't
like
even
an
know it
active
still
effort.
existed, frankly.
Fogarty was the president of Lehman Brothers after bankruptcy was declared, but was also the CEO of Orchard Brands when they declared bankruptcy.
Incredible,
right?
really. It's an incredible. I do wonder, like a little bit of hedging their bets, I'll call it.
Atkins was at Sears until 1999. Anyone remember Sears?
Yeah.
Like she
is
was there
really
for the
incredible.
largest
Well,
loss ever by a retailer in the 90s.
The more you mention these, it really makes me think that they have a very limited network at which they draw new directors from.
But it would make sense to me if they're drawing new directors from a pool of people that were at least industry relevant. But they're pulling from directors that's a pool of... there's no other way to think of this except fail uppers or ex-failers or fail adjacent.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's... So, and I haven't even gone through all of them. Like I have an extensive list here of all of these things.
Yeah.
So the basic question was, to your point, is this normal for a restaurant company, right? Like, is this who you expect? So I went and I found the closest comp company that I could think of, because these directors have all been rubber stamped. 40% of the outstanding shares are held by Capital Group, Vanguard, and BlackRock.
Yeah.
Basically, they are picking the directors. That's
Sure.
it. And they are, for the last 3 years, 4 votes for everybody.
Yeah, you can see that
dissent.
very clearly in the data that the shareholders don't have any interest in making a decision on directors.
So is this normal? And the closest comp I could come up with suggested, yes, this is very normal. I looked at Bloomin' Brands, which is another restaurant company, basically strip mall restaurants. Outback Steakhouse.
Outback Steakhouse. Mm-hmm.
Is their big one. They have an Italian joint. They have all the same
It's the same
strip
company,
mall
essentially,
palette, right?
yeah.
The same things. The board is basically exactly the same, including... that board has an ex-Darden executive on it, which at least is some food experience. They have board member history overlap. Chico's, Michael's, Walmart. Starboard Value, who you mentioned at the top, also has dealt with both Bloomin' Brands
Is that right?
and Darden. They've been on both boards.
Out of curiosity, does Bloomin' Brands also have directors attached to the gambling industry? I noticed that there are 2 directors here with ties to the gambling industry, which I don't quite get either.
The closest they get is Six Flags, which to me is basically a form of
it's
gambling
basically
with your
like
life.
yeah, it's basically like, what do they call that? Expense, discretionary spending, entertainment spending.
Best Buy is on the board. Staples instead of Office Depot. Urban Outfitters instead of Orchard Brands. There is just company after company.
It's just kind of mall area
literally
brands. Yeah,
It feels
but
like
again.
I just went to a New Jersey mall. That's what it feels like.
Again, mall area brands tend to file for bankruptcy. So again, I mean, you do have to wonder: is it a smart strategy, or are they just fulfilling their own destiny? I don't know.
So either this is high beta industries, high risk industries with razor thin lines to failure attract these kind of directors, or the nature of the business necessitates these people as experts, right? Like it's one or the other. Either failures can go to these places because they're known entities, but they just fail repeatedly, or they're chosen on purpose because they're the ones who are experts in possibly keeping this alive or understanding the business of failure.
The one thing that really stands out from everything you're saying to me is the future. Like how with these skill sets in these backgrounds, how does a company like Darden Restaurants, like Bloomin' Brands, how do they innovate? How do they change? How do they transition? How do they respond to all? I mean, the restaurant world. Even putting the pandemic aside, which is a lot, the restaurant world has gone under an incredible amount of change in the last decade. Do any of these directors have any ability to react to change?
That to me is the core sort of forward-looking question, like the what to do now question is, should we just accept the fact that restaurants are high failure risk and this is a restaurant company on the S&P 500, or should we go at this and say, you need to innovate. You need to be different. You can't draw from the same pool of sort of ex-failers and failure adjacent directors and executives. You got to do something different. So what I did was I decided to test the data and draft a whole new board.
So now, everybody out?
My recommendation here is not everybody out. My recommendation would be you vote against Jameson, who's the board who calls herself a turnaround CFO. The turnaround CFO who's on the Big Lots board that is currently declaring. She didn't really turn it around since 2015. They're declaring bankruptcy now.
The one by me is closing.
Wilmot is a vote against. There's no need for pen gambling. You don't need gambling. I don't understand the overlap between gambling and Olive Garden, unless they mean to suggest that every time I eat a breadstick, I don't know what's in it.
Well,
and that's a gamble.
Especially in light that the nomination chair, Juliana Chugg, is also from gambling, Caesars Entertainment Corporation.
And I think Fogarty isn't against because I don't. He basically has failed in 4 separate places, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure exactly what we need that for. So in the short term, there are 3 directors that I suggest voting against. They've been there long enough. I don't understand the skill set, and you would keep the rest. But in the long term here, I think the goal is to actually look at this and say, what are the positions that I want? Like if this was a sports team, if you have people who are just all failure, ex-failure, failure adjacent, they're likely to just play defense, not any innovation, no offense. So what is ideal?
And this is
here's what I
this is a
came
good
up with.
exercise that could happen in a lot of companies that we cover.
Well, I think actually, and you and I talked about this in pre-production, it's possible to think of this as, in a world where you can trade directors, where you can look around the publicly traded universe and take one of your directors and trade it for another, where you can attract directors with signing bonuses. You think of them as talent. Attract them with titles to committees, things like that. You can give them equity grants that are attractive so that they come to your company. I think if you think about a board like a sports team that way and you want top talent, then this is actually not as far-fetched as it's going to sound.
No, of course not.
what ideal would look like on this board to me is you want at least 2 directors that have food consumption, food production backgrounds.
I would think, yeah.
I mean, at a minimum. At a bare minimum,
Yeah.
right? You want somebody with logistics background, right? Like somebody transporting food around and
Sure.
supply chain understanding, whatever. The biggest asset for restaurants is just the real estate.
Yeah.
It's nothing. They're trademarks and real estate. That's all they really are.
Yeah.
You want somebody who understands labor, right?
Yeah, at least one person. I would say 2. I mean, this is a big deal moving forward.
It's a huge deal. You're all hourly workers. You're at risk of changing in hourly wages. You're at risk of people walking out or strikes if you don't treat them well.
Yeah, I was going to say,
you're at risk of the financial instability of your workers. They can't show up because you don't give them anything.
Yeah, hourly workers more and more who are keen to the fact that they're not earning a living wage and really can't pay all their bills and are going to be less inclined to stay at places like Olive Garden and Ruth's Chris, right?
I think they need, every board needs an accountant on it. Everyone gets an accountant because you need them on the audit committee. And then I think you actually want some tech people.
Yeah, why not?
Because I think you need some people who are used to thinking differently.
Yeah.
Even if it's inside of a different box.
Innovate,
a different box.
at least. Nice
and then
app.
I suggested as the final sort of role, someone who's super networked.
I mean, look, what you're really describing could be a great board for, I mean, maybe you swap out food production for something else for another company, but really what you're suggesting is a really great balanced board for most companies.
Yeah, you're playing a little offense, you're playing
Right.
a little defense, you need to understand the risk, but you have to measure the opportunities.
And
I think all those things need to be true.
And this is a point that is lost to shareholders because proxy after proxy after proxy, what you see in the skills matrix that the companies present is that everybody's kind of miraculously has skills in everything. They don't even take the time and effort to kind of break it down the way you are, which is to say, we've identified 7 key areas and we've brought in directors who represent these areas. They just sort of magically give you a board slate where everyone knows everything, so we're all good here.
My favorite is when they make diversity a skill. I've seen that in multiple proxies. But so I'm not going to go through. I drafted effectively, quote
And we can
unquote,
post this.
9 directors.
Put this on our data
I'm
drop.
going to post this on our website.
Yeah,
and I'm going to,
freeflow.llc.
and I'm going to make it a data drop for next week. So you can see this, but I'm going to walk through a couple of these. Just
give me
with
some
the thinking,
highlights because you
right?
have a lot of.
Here's
I see a lot of information here.
I got all their bios so you can see like what they're saying about themselves, where they are. But let's just take like first and foremost, I want to find somebody who's in food consumption.
There's an idea.
Just that food consumption as a knowledge base basically means restaurants. Somebody else who's done successful restaurants.
And at the top of your head, who is that current representative now on their board? Do they have one?
It's just Rick Cardenas, right?
But which does not count because that's not the board is there to provide oversight for management.
Exactly.
It's not his board. I mean,
exactly. So the method I used was I went through, and this is all free float data. I went through and I looked at directors in the entire universe who we tagged as having food production as a basic skill, a basic knowledge, right? And when I say basic knowledge, I mean they majored in agriculture. Their executive experience was at an agriculture company, but in an operations capacity, not like you're the head of HR at ConAgra. You are operations, right? Like you know how to operationalize, food production, or you worked at a restaurant company in an executive capacity. I chose food production. I chose mechanical skill. Mechanical skill is often associated with people who are good at production in general and process in general, making sure things are operationally tight and sound and efficient. I avoided anyone with an economics background. I didn't want someone who got an undergrad degree in economics and then got their MBA and then joined a restaurant company as a vice
VC
president
or something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I didn't want any of that, right? I'm trying to avoid that. But I wanted to pull from a pool of large cap directors, existing directors, so that they have board experience.
From our database.
And at large companies. And I wanted them to actually be top performers. I only picked people who had greater than 500 batting average in earnings and greater than 500 batting average in TSR, meaning the places that they've been, they have this knowledge set and the output is the companies where they've sat on boards outperform.
Yeah, and I'm assuming
They're
American.
a bare minimum average, but they outperform.
And I'm assuming American directors.
All American, all U.S. based.
All right, who do we got?
I
Food
did
production.
do one without it. The result was I got Deborah Crew, who's on the Diageo board.
Okay.
She began her career at Kraft Foods.
All right, I'm sold.
She's done marketing. She's done operations. She's been at Pepsi. She's been at
Beautiful.
She's even done. Diageo is an alcohol company, right?
Good
so
enough.
she's got that experience on the board. She actually has a. I wrote this down in my notes. She has a deep knowledge of vices. Is there anything you want more from?
Yeah.
Well,
let's be fair. Let's be real. I mean, a Darden Restaurants is a vice company, right? Because, I mean, you're going to the mall, you're having a bunch of breadsticks, you're having a big steak and a whiskey. Like, it's a vice.
It's basically vices. I mean, she worked at R.J. Reynolds for a while. Like, she does vice really, really well.
Hey, I'm sold. Deborah Crew.
But it's all food and consumptive vices.
Mm-hmm.
She's U.S. based, but she's worked for a UK based company, so she has
Even
international
better.
exposure.
Yeah.
And part of what I wanted to say is, how do they do it different? Because all of these directors have been U.S. based companies only. How do they do it different in other jurisdictions, in other countries,
They
in
don't
other
have these
regions?
restaurants. That's
they don't have the same labor problems. They don't have the same, but they think differently, right? And she covers both marketing and food. So I'm getting 2 for
Beautiful.
1 in a way.
So who else?
All right, here's another one, right? I wanted transportation. I wanted logistics. I'm talking about like supply chain logistics. So all I did, this one was really simple. I just chose transportation knowledge, U.S. based, and all performance metrics above batting 500.
This is a fun game. I'm enjoying this game.
By all, I mean earnings, TSR, carbon, and controversies. I don't want somebody who worked at a transportation company that ran over 17 people or spews a lot of carbon, because carbon is a big issue in logistics and transportation. Here's who I got. And these are people, when I shortlist these, there ended up being 5 to 10 to 20, depending on the short list, 20 directors. And I literally eyeballed for where they were, what's in their bio, and I picked them at random. None of this, and this is important, not one of these data points I used is a demographic data point. I didn't say I want women. I didn't say I want, like people of color. I didn't say any of that. I'm just going strictly on knowledge base and performance metrics. Mm-hmm. What I got was George Willis of Vulcan Materials board right now. He actually was at UPS for 20 years or longer. UPS for a long time. He was the president of U.S. operations at UPS.
Sold.
If there's anybody who knows how to get a thing from point A to point B, it's somebody who worked at a company like UPS. But because he's at Vulcan Materials, he actually has a lot of knowledge about commodities, commodity pricing, all sorts of other things related to commodities. He is on the board of Huber, which works on sustainable commodities and many of the things they do, like packaging and stuff like that, all actually relevant for a Darden.
And beyond that, 2 things I've noticed is that, as an example, George Willis, Vulcan Materials board. Vulcan Materials is headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama. You also had Elizabeth Keller for food production. She's on the Murphy Oil board, which is in Texas. These are good cultural fits for Darden Restaurants, which is in Orlando, Florida. So these are. I don't know that you actually looked at that, but for as far as a board being able to kind of get along and having a good cultural fit, have a good conversation, these are not outlandish picks.
They're not at all. In fact, some of the picks were. They worked at related companies, so they're not totally unknown.
Okay.
I ended up getting Pamela Puryear. Mm-hmm. She's at Spartan Nash, which is a military food supplier. Actually, they have they work with the U.S. military on food supplying.
Sounds about the same to me.
But she worked in a human resources capacity. In fact, for that, I looked for personnel and human resources knowledge, therapy knowledge, exposure to unions or low wage workers. And she worked at, she's on the board of Spartan Nash, but she's worked at Pfizer as a chief talent officer. She's worked at Walgreens, which is, it's half of that is low wage, a low wage workforce. She's worked across multiple industries in that capacity. She has an MBA and a degree in psychology and a degree in organizational psychology, a PhD in it.
Yeah.
And she's on a food provider board. So
yeah, I was going to say, once again, perfect cultural fit, Spartan Nash, Michigan, located in Michigan.
When I was done with this, and there are a couple of good ones in here, I won't belabor them.
Yeah.
Now, remember, I said I put in no demographic data. One of the fun things that came out of this was I ended up with a board that had 3 white women, 1 black woman, 1 black man, 1 Asian man, and 3 white guys.
Perfect.
It would be one of the most diverse boards in the sector, if not the most diverse.
Huh. Fascinating.
And I am not doing this with any demographic. This is purely performance.
Right.
For every single one of these,
Interesting.
I chose, they had to be on boards that outperformed as a criteria. Outperformed in some aspect, right? That means it's totally possible that there's ways to find cultural fit, there's ways to find knowledge fit,
Right.
and all you need is the data to do it.
Which
and
we
you
have.
You can end up with a board
FreeFloatAnalytics.com.
that actually is fit for purpose.
Yeah, I love this. So again, this entire board slate for Darden Restaurants will be available on freefloat.llc, right? A data drop. And
Yeah, it'll be all there on a data drop.
And the key takeaway here, though, is a vote against, remind me, who? Jameson, chair?
So the vote is against the chair of the board, Jameson.
Cynthia Jameson.
The vote against Wilmot, who's currently...
Compensation Committee Chair Timothy Wilmot, who comes from Penn National Gaming, of all things.
And Fogarty, I think his name is
James Fogarty, who comes from
Fogarty.
beauty brands and pharmaceutical brands. And so it's, again, like kind of an odd fit there.
But I think the goal here is to think differently about how you construct your boards.
Yeah.
And if you could engage with the board on a level, or at least a third party on a level, and do a universal proxy card in which you're attracting talent and putting them on the board, rather than thinking about who did management give me, I'll tell you, this process took me 1 day.
I'll tell you this, too. We get a lot of feedback that our process is negative because we're targeting directors to vote against, or we're targeting directors to get rid of. That's not entirely. That's like a part of the truth of what we're doing here. Really, what this suggests is that this is a positive process of finding and championing the right directors who will actually make a contribution to the boardroom. And you're right to point out that we could see these people as high performers. We could offer them signing bonuses. Does not have to be a negative process. It's just finding the right directors and finding the right fit for your company. So other than that, Matt, we have say on pay up for vote at Darden Restaurants. We actually have 1, 2, 4 shareholder proposals. Does anything stick out to you that you want to talk about before we wrap up today's show?
There was nothing that stuck out to me. I was against pay. I think as a general rule, I'm going to be against pay when the pay ratio is above average, 250 to 1.
Especially when you have a policy where you're taking 10 cents out of your workers' paychecks to get that's weird. It's a little awkward.
It felt weird.
What about shareholder proposals? We have a bunch on. We have one on chicken, one on pork.
I actually thought the chicken and the pork shareholder proposals, both well-meaning. I don't disagree with them, but in general, I feel like miss the fact that they do beef and pasta, right? Like, it felt weird to me to focus on. It's not like they don't do those things.
Yeah.
But there are other bigger things that I feel like if you're going to spend time on a shareholder proposal, the other bigger things matter.
Where I will disagree with you on both of those is that these seem to be purely about disclosure, in that the company has promised to do certain things, like, for instance, to release key welfare indicators related to broiler chickens. I don't know a lot about this subject, but if you're going to purport to change something, Darden promised to change something, to improve something by a certain year. Release all this. The Humane Society they just want the data. They just want to see the process. They want to see the progress, right?
That's great. I don't disagree with that, but as we just saw with Tractor Supply, right? And this is where that becomes relevant. These U-turners, if you are willing to U-turn on something
That's
like
true.
humans in your company,
you're right.
U-turning on hitting a target for broiler chickens is not something that's high on your agenda, right?
Yeah.
That's where the people matter. And what you've learned about these people is you can't ask them to give you a report or hit a target because they don't care about that.
Well,
if you don't like it, replace them. These are misplaced to me.
We had a fascinating request from a client this week that you told me about where they were interested in our data on the flip-flopper, the DEI flip-floppers, right?
Right.
And their question was really pretty simple but kind of genius, which is, well, if they're going to change their minds here, where else are they going to change their minds?
Like, if they don't take this seriously, what else don't they take seriously?
And this is the part that all the business news reports miss out on. They don't cover that particular aspect of these stories. Yes, they cover that the company is rescinding its DEI policies, but what they don't cover is that this is actually just a handful of human beings making this decision in a boardroom, changing their minds for no apparent reason just because of activist pressure. So where else are they going to change their mind? I thought that was an interesting request from a client.
So in the end, I basically said, I thought to myself, they're not the biggest risks in the first place, and they don't. I think you vote against the directors. I think if there are directors on this board who were there when they set these targets. If they're going to flip-flop on the target, they're not going to give you reporting on it. Vote them out. I don't know why you would ask in a shareholder proposal anymore. The people are what matter. So, but otherwise, nothing stood out to me.
Yeah, it looks like you're voting for requesting the company to comply with WHO guidelines for antimicrobials for food-producing animals in the supply chain. That's a mouthful. That one comes from Mercy Investment Services. And then finally, from the Sisters of the Order of St. Dominic Grand Rapids, you also supporting their proposal, which is requesting the company issue a report on reducing greenhouse gas emissions in alignment with Paris's 1.5 degree goal, right? So,
yep, that's it.
A lot going on at Darden restaurants, believe it or not. Again, we are going to drop some of this data on our website if you want to hear more about this. It's actually quite interesting. It's quite fascinating, this board that you drafted for Darden. I'm hoping that you will send this to Darden itself. Why not, right? That's the proxy countdown for the week of September 9th, 2024. Join us next week when we jump back into the alternative democracy pool. Forever on the lookout for shareholder sharks, floating band-aids, and wayward directors.